The General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Church and the American government are in bed, and it's something that a number of persons do not want to speak to and of and about because of the sensitivity of the matter. My channel is about providing with trusted information for you to use to make decisions. The issue of the separation between church and state is critical to civil functioning of the society. A matter of fact, Durkheim would actually refer to it as organic solidarity. Organic in the sense that when you think of the human body in terms of all the parts, the hand, the feet, the eye, the brain, the liver, the kidney, all of that is organically working to ensure that you are able to be a person, to live, to carry out your functions. Whenever that organic system is actually retarded or hampered or tampered with, it destroys the proper and full functioning of the human body. Likewise with the church and the state. The church function is like a human system, and the government, the political structure function is another organic system. So therefore, when the government interferes with the function of the church, what it does is restore the church from functioning effectively in its mandate. And a number of persons are not seeming to understand that. And as a result, there ought to be a clear demarcation or separation between the church and the state. When it is that the American government is giving funding to the church, we need to understand something clearly here. The man who pays the piper calls the flute. What does that mean? The individual who pays you determine what the product or the outcome is going to be. So when the American government is actually given the General Conference of Seventh-day Adventist Churches money, or church that is, money, it is able to call the shots. Now, it may be a part of the reason why the Seventh-day Adventist Church was supporting the vaccination of people across the world, because they were in bed with the American government. And the American government at the time wanted the wholesome vaccination of people for whatever reason. And I'm not going to be going into that discussion for whatever reason. And therefore, they were able to call the flute, which is a substantial part of the reason why many Seventh-day Adventist pastors, including the General Conference, technically came out in support of the vaccine, that people should be vaccinated. Why? The American government wanted vaccination of the people. And because they were given the General Conference money, they were able to dictate the terms and conditions of that money that they were giving them, which could explain what was happening. The church has a different function from the state, and there ought to be a separation between the function of the state and the function of society. When there is an intersection with the function of the church and the function of the state, that gray area is what normally changes the normal organic function of the church, and therefore have the church being corrupted by the state. That in itself is already a corrupt institution. The state is already a corrupt institution, and that is why we need bodies that are separate from the state, that will critically examine and do things in keeping with the best interests of their entity, which will be the church, which will be civic organizations, which will be your family, which would be all the other things that operate in society. There ought to be a distinction whenever there's an overlap between the church and the state. We're going to be experiencing challenges. Trump's view of removing the funds away from the SDA church, which is the General Conference, opens more information about the church being influenced by the state and how the state has been driving some of the policies and programs in the church. You don't want to deal with it, but it's a reality. The man who pays the piper calls the tune. If the state is giving the church money, it will give the church money in condition because money must be spent for something. What is that thing that the state is giving the church money for? We don't know. The General Conference knows. And that, for me, opens a plethora of things that possibly are hidden in the gray area between the church and the state, which could be explaining why the church doesn't have a policy, an outright policy against homosexuality and against vaccination and against many things, because those things are the anchor of the state. And the state want a number of things to be in society, and therefore they are able to dictate how they want their money to be spent, and why the church is unable to speak on some issues simply because the man who pays the piper calls the tune or the flute. No, it's difficult to understand and difficult to swallow that the Adventist church is technically being corrupted by the state. A number of you do not see it. A number of you see it difficult to understand. A number of you want to say, Paul, you are. No, I am saying to you, the man who pays the piper calls the flute and the tune. The fact that the Adventist church was receiving money all these years from the American government, it could be explaining why the Adventist church cannot have a single perspective against some issues that are biblical, because the state is not anti those biblical issues. What do you have to say? Like, share, and subscribe to my channel as I continue to provide trust information for you to use to make decision. What Trump did was a blessing for the Adventist church. It opens things and it makes us understand why there's a gray area in the Adventist church on some matters.